Hi guys, it's Emma AITA, your favorite AI slop tuber. Before we jump into today's video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks so much for your support. Now, let's get right into the video. AITA for refusing to share my inheritance with my siblings after finding out the truth about my parents' will. When I, 35 male, tell people I'm the black sheep of the family, they usually assume I was rebellious, or wild, or just chose a different path. The truth is, I wasn't any of those things. I was just less favored. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. No physical abuse, no screaming fights, just subtle, persistent neglect. Being left out of conversations, being the last to hear important news, getting a used bike for Christmas when my siblings got new ones, the kind of small, persistent exclusions that don't seem like much on the surface, but add up over a lifetime. I have two younger siblings, Josh, 32 male, and Mallory, 30 female. We all grew up in the same house in a quiet suburb in North Carolina. My dad was a small business owner. He ran an auto repair shop that he inherited from his dad. And my mom was a stay-at-home parent until we were all in school, then took a part-time job at the library. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. At least, I thought we were. As kids, I noticed Josh and Mallory seemed to get more attention, but I chalked it up to me being the oldest. That's just how it is, right? Older kids are expected to be more independent. But as we got older, the difference grew starker. I paid for my first car myself, saved up from after-school jobs. My dad gave Josh his first car, a well-maintained used Toyota Camry. Mallory got my mom's old Honda, and they covered her insurance and gas. When I brought this up once, my mom said, well, we just weren't in a good place financially back then. But somehow things were always better for them. It didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. What else could I do? College was another thing. I got into UNC Chapel Hill, and while my tuition was covered through scholarships and grants, I had to work 2 jobs to cover housing and books. Josh's entire tuition at NC State was covered by my parents. Mallory got into Duke, and while she took out some loans, Mom and Dad helped her a lot. Again, I said nothing. I was proud I made it on my own. I didn't need their help. After college, I moved 2 hours away and started working in software development. I didn't visit home much. I told myself it was because of work, but really, I didn't feel welcome. Every holiday felt like I was crashing a party where everyone else knew the inside jokes. I never felt missed. One year, I skipped Thanksgiving altogether, just to see what would happen. No one called. No one asked why I wasn't there. That's when it really hit me. I was an afterthought. Years passed. I built a stable career, bought a modest house, dated a few people, but never settled down. Meanwhile, Josh married his high school sweetheart and had 2 kids. Mallory became a therapist and moved to Charlotte with her fiancé. I kept in touch out of duty more than affection. Then, in 2022, everything changed. My dad died of a sudden heart attack. It was brutal, no warning. One minute he was mowing the lawn, the next he collapsed. I drove down that night, got a hotel, and met the family at the hospital. It was tense. My mom cried and clung to Josh. Mallory stayed close to her fiancé. I hovered on the edge, like an acquaintance rather than a son. But I stayed. I helped arrange the funeral, handled some logistics, even made a slideshow for the service. It was emotionally exhausting, but I felt like I needed to be there. About a month later, my mom called and asked me to come home for a meeting with the lawyer. She was vague, but I assumed it was about the will. When I got there, the lawyer sat us all down, Mom, me, Josh, and Mallory, and began reading Dad's final wishes. And that's when the bomb dropped. The will stated, clearly and without ambiguity, that I was to inherit the house, the auto shop, which he still owned but had leased out, and the majority of his financial assets, around $800,000 in total after accounting for insurance and retirement. Josh and Mallory were each left $20,000. Silence. Josh turned red. Mallory gaped at Mom. Mom looked furious. What the hell is this? Josh spat. The lawyer, unfazed, repeated the terms. Your father was very specific. He felt your brother had been overlooked and unsupported for many years, and this was his way of correcting that imbalance. Mallory blinked. So you're saying he gets almost $1 million and we get nothing? The lawyer clarified, you're getting $20,000 each. It's not nothing, Mom cut in, voice tight. This wasn't supposed to happen. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. It's a legally binding document, ma'am. I sat there, stunned. I hadn't expected anything. I honestly thought Dad would have left everything to Mom or split it 3 ways. But this was vindication. For the first time in my life, my father saw me. I wish I could say the meeting ended calmly. I wish I could say everyone respected Dad's wishes, took their respective shares, and walked away with a sense of closure. But that's not what happened. The second the lawyer left the room, all hell broke loose. Josh launched into a tirade about fairness, shouting that I must have manipulated Dad somehow. Mallory kept repeating, "This isn't right," like a mantra, as if sheer repetition would rewrite the will. But what shocked me most was Mom. She didn't say a word at first, just stared at me, like I was some villain who had conned his way into a fortune. Then, after Josh and Mallory had stormed out of the office, she finally spoke. "He never told me he changed the will." I shrugged, still reeling. "I didn't know either." She shook her head. "He should have talked to me. We made an agreement. Everything would be split evenly." Now that made my stomach turn. I suddenly realized that maybe the favoritism I experienced all my life hadn't been incidental. It hadn't been some accidental byproduct of birth order or circumstance. It had been coordinated, agreed upon. "You agreed to cut me out?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She flinched but didn't deny it. "It's not like that. We thought it would be better for everyone. Josh was taking over more responsibility with the family. Mallory was planning a family. You don't even visit." That was the nail in the coffin, right there. The implicit belief that because I didn't come around enough, I didn't deserve what the others did. Never mind the fact that every visit made me feel invisible. Never mind the years of being passed over, ignored, disregarded. She had decided I didn't measure up, and that was that. I left the office without another word. I didn't return calls for a few days, just tried to sit with it all. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was acknowledgement. It was proof that Dad saw what had happened, that he'd maybe regretted it, that he'd wanted in his own way to make things right. Of course, Josh and Mallory weren't having it. Within a week, they were both reaching out, first under the guise of wanting to talk, then under the guise of working something out. I refused. I told them I was following Dad's wishes to the letter and didn't see any reason to deviate. That's when the tone shifted. Josh started sending passive-aggressive texts. Mallory sent me an email accusing me of destroying the family. I ignored them. Then they got Mom involved. She called me one Sunday afternoon, right after I'd gotten back from a grocery run. Her voice was tight, brittle. "You need to give them some of that money." "I need to?" I repeated, already exhausted. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "You don't have a family, they do. They need it more." There it was again, the idea that I didn't count because I wasn't married with kids, that my needs were secondary, optional. "I'm not giving them anything, Mom. I didn't ask for this. I didn't know about it. But I'm not undoing what Dad deliberately chose to do. If you have a problem with it, maybe take it up with him." That's when she snapped. "You always were selfish. No wonder we didn't trust you with anything growing up." She hung up before I could reply. I sat on the couch for a long time afterward, the phone heavy in my hand. That was the first time she'd said it out loud. Confirmation, at last, that my instincts over the years hadn't been paranoia. They'd written me off long ago. After that last conversation with Mom, something inside me hardened. It wasn't rage, it was clarity. For years, I had tried to tell myself that maybe I was exaggerating. Maybe I was reading too much into things. I had bent myself into emotional knots trying to justify their behavior or make myself worthy of their love. But now I had confirmation. I was never really in the running for their affection, let alone their support. They loved the idea of family. But the version of family they upheld had never had room for me. Weeks passed. I didn't attend the memorial brunch Mallory tried to organize. Josh sent me a curt message that simply read, "We'll remember this." I suppose that was meant to be a threat, but it didn't have the weight it once might have. I didn't care anymore. I wasn't a bitter man, not really, but I was finally learning that there's a difference between being kind and being a doormat. What complicated things was how the rest of the extended family got involved. My cousin Heather, someone I used to be close to growing up, reached out through Facebook and said, "I don't know what's going on, but your mom's really upset. Maybe you should reconsider." Reconsider what? Doing what my father explicitly told me not to do in the only legal and deliberate expression of his intentions? I didn't bother replying. Then came the emails. Josh and Mallory had evidently decided to try a different approach. Guilt by consensus. Aunts and uncles, second cousins, old family friends I hadn't seen in over a decade started contacting me. Not all of them were cruel. Some just said things like, "I hope you'll find it in your heart to be generous." But the underlying message was the same. I was expected to surrender what I'd been given, Not because it was right, but because other people wanted it more. I finally posted something public. It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. I wrote, "Dad's will was clear. It reflected decisions he made on his own, not under pressure from me or anyone else. I didn't know about the changes beforehand, and I am not going to violate his wishes out of guilt or manipulation. If that makes me the villain in your story, so be it." That post started a firestorm. Josh commented, "We all know how good you are at rewriting stories," which made no sense to anyone but me. Mallory replied with a sarcastic, "Glad to know greed won over family." A few people liked my post. Most stayed silent. What hurt was when Heather unfriended me. I'd thought she understood. But it wasn't just online fallout. In real life, things got awkward too. I live in a mid-sized city not too far from where I grew up, and it's not hard to bump into people. At the store, at a gas station, even at the gym, I noticed stares, whispers. Once I heard someone say, "That's the one who took all the money," like I was some cartoon villain hoarding gold in a tower. One of the most surreal moments came when my old high school English teacher, Mr. Ellery, of all people, sent me a letter. A physical letter, on actual stationery, in cursive handwriting. He said he'd heard about the situation and wanted to say he admired me for sticking to my values, and that he hoped I used the inheritance to create something meaningful. I kept that letter. It reminded me that not everyone had bought into the narrative being spun. 3 months passed, and I still hadn't spoken to any of them. Not Josh. Not Mallory. Not Mom. At first, the silence had been suffocating. Guilt gnawed at the edge of every quiet evening. But with time, the silence transformed into peace. I began to realize just how much emotional bandwidth I'd devoted over the years to seeking validation from people who, frankly, never had any intention of giving it. With the inheritance, I didn't go out and buy a sports car or a yacht. Instead, I did something that may sound boring to others but meant everything to me. I bought a house. My first. A modest 2-bedroom place with a small garden out back. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, I had a space that was not a negotiation, not shared, not conditional, and more than that, I finally started therapy, real therapy. Not the half-hearted counseling I'd tried in college where I couldn't afford more than 3 sessions. This time, I was able to work through not just the grief of losing my father, but the lifelong emotional bruises I'd carried from growing up in a household where I was always the odd one out. My therapist, Amy, helped me unpack years of subtle invalidations, microaggressions, dismissals, helped me understand that love isn't supposed to come with a scoreboard. About 6 months after the reading of the will, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email. A real letter. From my mother. It was short. A single paragraph. She wrote, "I still don't agree with what you're doing. I think it's selfish. But I know your father made his choice, and I see now that maybe he saw something I didn't. I won't ask you to change your mind. I just hope, one day, you'll speak to your brother and sister again. Family is family. No matter what." I stared at the letter for a long time. There was no apology, no accountability, just resignation. And maybe that was the most I was ever going to get. I didn't write back. I wasn't interested in reopening the door just yet. Maybe someday. Maybe after more healing, more reflection. But not now. Not when I'd finally started building something for myself. Something real. Something that wasn't tainted by years of emotional imbalance and false closeness. I spent the anniversary of my dad's death alone, walking a trail I knew he loved when we went camping during my rare visits as a teen. I brought one of his old flannel jackets with me, still smelled faintly like cedar and dust. At the top of the hill, overlooking the trees, I sat and finally cried, not because of the money, not because of the fractured family. I cried because I wished he'd said something sooner. I wished he'd told me he saw me, that he got it. That he hadn't just stood silently beside Mom while she reallocated my worth based on proximity and compliance. But maybe, in the end, this was his way of doing just that. A late, imperfect attempt to right what had been so thoroughly warped. So now I live my life quietly. I garden, I cook, I'm still in therapy. I've donated to a few charities in Dad's name. I'm not swimming in money, taxes took a chunk, and I'm budgeting like a responsible adult. But I'm okay. More okay than I've ever been. And when I think back to the question that started all this, am I the a-hole for refusing to share my inheritance with my siblings? I can finally answer with conviction. No, I'm not. I'm not the a-hole for honoring my father's wishes. I'm not the a-hole for finally drawing a boundary. I'm not the a-hole for protecting the one thing I was finally given without conditions. They had their time with me. They had years to treat me like family. They chose not to. And now, for once, I'm choosing me.